Hey, algebra students, in this lesson, we are going to be talking about how to solve inequalities when you're multiplying and dividing. Now, you may remember our lesson on solving inequalities by adding and subtracting. And what we learned is you can add the same thing to both sides of an inequality. You can subtract the same thing from both sides of an inequality, and it works just like an equation. The inequality sign stays the same, and you just add the same thing to both sides in an attempt to get a variable on a side by itself. We're still trying to get a variable on a side by itself to solve inequalities, okay? But when we multiply and divide, there's one extra thing we need to worry about. Now let's take a look at each of these four scenarios in turn. First scenario is this. Let's say that we're multiplying both sides of an inequality. We're going to use the inequality A is greater than B. And we're going to multiply by a number that's greater than 0. What does it mean if a number is greater than 0? It means the number is positive. We're multiplying by a positive number. What happens when we multiply both sides of this inequality by C, a positive number? Nothing interesting, okay? We can multiply both sides of an inequality by C, and the inequality stays exactly the same. Notice the sign is pointing the same direction. It's just AC is greater than BC. The same is true if it's less than. If A is less than B, multiply both sides by C, and C is a positive number, the inequality sign stays the same. Okay, so far what we've learned is this. You can add anything to both sides of an inequality, it stays the same. You can subtract anything from both sides of an inequality, it stays the same. You can multiply both sides of an inequality by a positive number. You can divide both sides of an inequality by a positive number. Notice that if C is a positive number, we can divide both sides by C and the inequality sign stays the same. So in solving inequalities, those things all work without changing the inequality. Now, here's the thing you need to pay attention to. If you multiply an inequality by a number less than 0, in other words, by a negative number, let's say we're trying to solve A is greater than B, and we end up multiplying both sides by a C, which is a negative value. What happens to the sign? The sign flips when you multiply both sides of an inequality by a negative number. Not if it was a positive number, not if you're adding or subtracting. Doesn't matter if you're adding or subtracting positive or negative numbers. What matters is if you're multiplying by a negative number, it flips the sign. If you're dividing by a negative number, it flips the sign. Here, if I said positive up here, I meant negative. If you're multiplying by a negative number, it flips the sign. Dividing by a negative number, it flips the sign. That's what you need to know. All right, let's do some practice problems and see how this works out. 1/3 n is less than 2. I need to get n on a side by itself. I know that I need to multiply by the inverse of 1/3 to get 1/3 off of this side. I'm going to multiply by 3. Can't just multiply one side by 3, though. I have to multiply both sides by 3 to keep this inequality the same. Multiply both sides by 3, that gets rid of my 1/3. This side is going to become 6. If I multiply by 3, here's the big question. Does it flip the sign? 3 is a positive number. I can multiply by a positive number without flipping the sign. So here's what this answer is going to end up being. N is less than 6. Multiplied this side by 3 to get the 1/3 away. Multiplied 2 by 3 to make 6. My sign stays the same. My answer is n is less than 6. Here's the graph of that inequality. All right, next, let's do letter B. Negative x divided by 4 is less than 8. So I'm going to I'm going to multiply both sides of this, but now I need to multiply by -4, not just 4, because I have to get this negative sign off the left side of my inequality also. So when I multiply by -4 on both sides, because I'm multiplying by a negative, it ends up flipping the sign. Notice I went from negative x over 4 is less than 8 to x is greater than -32. I needed to flip the sign because I multiplied both sides by a negative. Same thing is true for division. How do I get w on a side by itself? I need to divide both sides by 6, by positive 6. 57 divided by 6 is a fraction. It's going to actually be a fraction that can be simplified. I believe that's 19 over 3. 57 over 6 is 19 over 3. Hey, I divided both sides by 6. Do I flip the sign? No. Hold on, I must have done this one wrong. Let me just think about this for a second. 57 divided by 6. Let me just do 57 divided by 6. Tried to do that one in my head. 9.5. Of course, because 9 times 6 is 54, and then I need another half of 6 to get up to 57. So it's 9.5. W is less than or equal to 9.5 is the answer to that one. Notice that the sign did not flip. Let's take a look at letter D. Will the sign flip if I have to divide both sides by -4? Well, dividing by, or really, it's kind of like the same in multiplying both sides by -1/4. That's going to change this side to -1/8. What happens to the sign when I divide both sides by a negative? Notice that the sign flips. It was greater than or equal to. Now it's less than or equal to. Uh, now, notice that I have this written in the same format as it was here. A is on the right. My -1/8 is on the left. Hey, if I wanted to write this so that the A was on the left, which is a very standard way to do this, if I ever flip the variable to the other side, I just exchange both sides of this. I could write A is greater than or equal to -1/8. It is possible for me to just exchange values on both sides of the inequality symbol by flipping the inequality symbol and exchanging values. So this -1/8 is less or equal to A. A is greater than or equal to 1/8. This last problem is going to take a little bit of thinking. Barney earns a 4% commission on what he sells. How much does he need to sell to earn at least $750 commission every month? Now, here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this in a couple of steps. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to note that we want his commission to be greater than or equal to. I'm just going to use this as my greater than or equal to sign because I'm typing. The commission needs to be greater than or equal to 750. Okay, now this is not really useful because the question is, how much does he need to sell, not what is his commission? But here's the thing. I know how commissions work. The commission is based on how much he sells. He earns 4% of whatever he sells. So the commission equals 4% times the amount sold, 4% S. And just for simplicity, I'm going to replace 4% with the actual decimal number that represents it, 0.04. So the commission is 0.04 times his sales. So does it make sense? I could just go back up to this original equation and replace C with 0.04S is going to be greater than or equal to 750. And now I can solve for 750. How am I going to do that? Well, I am going to divide both sides of this by 0.04. Okay, I'm going to divide both sides by 0.04. Now, do I need to flip this sign so that it's greater than or equal to becomes less than or equal to? The answer to that, I do not, because I am not dividing by a negative. If I was dividing or multiplying by a negative, that's the only case where I flip the sign. Or remember that other thing, if I switch the variable to the other side, if I switch the contents of both sides of the equation, I flip the sign. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just dividing by a positive. So when I divide by 0.04, I'm going to get S is greater than or equal to whatever 750 divided by 0.04 is. I'm going to need a calculator for that. 750 divided by 0.04, 18,000. He needs to sell $18,750 worth of stuff to get a $750 commission. I hope he's selling cars because otherwise that's going to be tough. Let's just make sure we got that right. Does he have to sell greater than 18,750? Yes, $18,750 or more. It could be equal to, because at least means it could be exactly 750 or more, right? So greater than or equal to is correct. All right, now you know what we're doing with these. You know that when you multiply or divide both sides of an inequality by a positive number, it just stays the same. If you multiply or divide both sides of an inequality by a negative number, you have to flip that sign. You are ready to do the problem set for next time.